Kyle Tucker is struggling so badly his own broadcaster just suggested he fake an injury. It didn't come from a rival. It didn't come from a frustrated opposing manager sitting in front of a microphone after a tough loss. It didn't come from an anonymous account on social media, or from a columnist with a history of provocative takes, or from someone with a reason to be unkind. It came from his own side. From the booth that is supposed to be the place where a player's best moments are celebrated and his difficult ones are given the benefit of the doubt. From the voice that thousands of fans hear every single game, the voice they trust to contextualize what they're watching, the voice that is supposed to find the hopeful angle even when the hopeful angle is genuinely difficult to find. That voice looked at Kyle Tucker's season and suggested he fake an injury. The room didn't go still when it was said. There was no dramatic pause. No sharp intake of breath from the crowd. It happened in the middle of a broadcast, between pitches, in the casual conversational space that broadcasters fill with observations and analysis and the occasional attempt at honesty that goes further than anyone planned. But the words landed. And they didn't stop landing. There is a particular kind of struggle in professional baseball that is harder to watch than an obvious collapse. A complete breakdown has its own clarity. When a player loses everything at once, the swing, the confidence, the results, the story writes itself simply. The numbers are bad. The body language confirms it. Everyone agrees on what they're seeing. Kyle Tucker's struggle is not that kind. It is the kind that is harder to name and therefore harder to accept. The kind where the swing still looks like the swing. Where the approach at the plate still carries the intelligence and the patience that made him one of the most respected hitters in the league. Where the preparation, by every account, has not changed. Where the person inside the uniform is doing everything that the person inside the uniform is supposed to do. And the results keep not coming. That is the specific cruelty of what Tucker is living through right now. Not that he has stopped trying. Not that he has abandoned the habits that built his reputation. But that the habits are intact and the results are absent, and the gap between those two things grows wider with every at-bat and every game and every week that passes without the number on the board changing the way it is supposed to change. That gap is what the broadcaster was looking at when he said what he said. Tucker arrived in Chicago with a specific weight attached to his name. Not the weight of expectation exactly. Something more precise than that. The weight of a trade that the Cubs fanbase had decided meant something about the direction of the franchise. About whether the organization was serious. About whether this was a team building towards something real or a team performing the appearance of building towards something real. He was supposed to answer that question with his bat. He was supposed to walk into Wrigley Field and immediately make the answer obvious. The at-bats came. The games accumulated. The opportunities arrived the way opportunities arrive for a hitter of his caliber, frequently, in meaningful situations, with the stadium paying attention and the broadcast cameras finding his face in the dugout between innings. And the answer kept not arriving. The average dropped. The slugging percentage told a story that nobody in the Cubs organization wanted to read out loud. The runners left on base became a number that analysts started referencing in sentences that began with phrases like historically difficult and unprecedented struggles for a player of this profile. Tucker stood in the batter's box each time and looked like Kyle Tucker. The stance was right. The timing was close. The eye was still there, still working, still recognizing pitches with the same intelligence that had made him dangerous in Houston. But something between the recognition and the result was getting lost. And nobody, not Tucker, not the coaching staff, not the analysts who had watched every at-bat 3 times, could fully explain where. The broadcaster's comment arrived on a night when the struggle had become too visible to soften. Tucker had come up in a situation that the game had gift-wrapped for him. Runners on base. A pitcher he had seen before. A count that favored the hitter. Everything arranged in the way that a struggling player hopes it will be arranged, because those are the moments when the fog is supposed to lift. The fog did not lift. The at-bat ended the way too many at-bats had ended recently. Not with violence. Not with a strikeout that revealed some catastrophic hole in the swing. Quietly. Almost gently. The kind of out that is somehow harder to process than a dramatic failure because it carries no obvious lesson. No clear adjustment. No moment you can point to and say that was the problem and here is how we fix it. Just an out. One more out in a growing collection of outs that were starting to define a season that was supposed to be defined by something else entirely. The broadcaster paused after it happened. Those who were watching closely enough said the pause was slightly longer than a normal transition pause. Long enough to suggest that something was being considered. Wade. Decided. And then the words came. He said that at this point, maybe Tucker needed to find a way to step away. To get a few days. To reset. He said it carefully. He tried to frame it gently. But the frame couldn't contain what he was actually suggesting. That the kindest thing that could happen to Kyle Tucker right now might be a small fiction. A minor exit. A few days away from the at-bats that were currently making everything worse. A fake injury. Not because Tucker was broken physically. But because something needed to stop long enough to breathe. The reaction came in waves. The first wave was disbelief. Broadcasters don't say that. Not about their own players. Not on a live broadcast with thousands of people listening and the clip already moving toward the part of the internet that never forgets anything. The sentence seemed to belong to a private conversation between coaches, or a frank exchange between front office members behind a closed door. Not to the airwaves. The second wave was something more complicated. Because underneath the disbelief was a recognition that a lot of people had been thinking a version of that thought without saying it. That the broadcaster had simply been honest in a space where honesty of that particular kind is not supposed to live. That the words were jarring not because they were wrong but because of where they were spoken and by whom. The third wave was the one that settled. The one that asked the harder question. Not whether the broadcaster should have said it. But what it meant that someone close enough to Tucker's situation had arrived at that conclusion. What it meant about the depth of the struggle. What it meant about the options that had already been considered and exhausted before a broadcaster on a live broadcast lands on fake an injury as a reasonable suggestion. That was the wave that didn't go away. Tucker did not address it directly after the game. His answers in the post-game area near the clubhouse were brief and carried the particular economy of a player who has answered versions of the same question too many times and has run out of new ways to say that he is working on it. That he believes in his process. That the results will come. He said those things. He said them without breaking. Without the kind of visible frustration that would have given the narrative a new angle to pursue. But his eyes carried something that his words were working very hard not to carry. A reporter asked him gently whether the external noise, the commentary, the analysis, the clip from the broadcast that was already everywhere, had reached him. He said he tried not to pay attention to outside noise. He said it the way people say things they know are only partially true. The Cubs coaching staff gathered after the game in the way coaching staffs gather when a problem has moved past the stage of quiet internal management and into the stage of public visibility. The conversations that happen in those rooms are not the conversations that make it into press conference transcripts. They are the conversations about real options. Real timelines. Real decisions about how long a struggling player at a significant contract is given to find himself before the finding becomes a subtraction rather than an addition. Those conversations were happening. Whether the outcome of those conversations would eventually resemble what the broadcaster had suggested, whether Tucker would find a way to step away from the lineup for a few days under whatever circumstances could be arranged, remained unclear. What was clear was that the situation had arrived at a place that nobody had anticipated when Tucker's name was first attached to Chicago. A place where a broadcaster who roots for him, who wants him to succeed, who understands what his success would mean for the team and the season and the fanbase, had looked at the available options and arrived at a suggestion that no broadcaster should ever have reason to make. Kyle Tucker will hit again. That sentence is not hope. It is not blind optimism constructed to soften a difficult moment. It is a statement about what this player has demonstrated across a career that contains far more evidence of his ability than this season's numbers currently reflect. The swing is there. The eye is there. The baseball intelligence that made opposing pitchers respect him in Houston has not dissolved in Chicago. But right now, in this moment, on this night, after that at-bat and that broadcast and that suggestion that landed harder than any curveball has landed against him this season, the struggle is real. And it is deep. And the person who covers him for a living, the person whose job is to find the hopeful angle even when it is genuinely difficult to find, looked at it clearly. And couldn't find one. That is not nothing. That is the whole story. The broadcaster said what a lot of people were already thinking. The difference is that he said it out loud. And now nobody can pretend they didn't hear it.